Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and on Monday, 8.3 hit PTR and brought with it a slew of new systems, raid bosses, and gearing, with more still to come. Today I want to talk about the new Kiss/Curse rings at 8.3 and look at their current effects on PTR. Before we get into that, if you're interested in any weak auras or add-ons you see here, there's a link to my Twitch and Discord in the description where you can find them all. Now, the interesting thing about these rings is that some of the curse effects actually can be managed pretty easily in certain settings, making them pretty much only a positive effect. Some of the effects also can be used to generate resources, which can potentially be used in combat for a bit of extra damage as well. Let's jump right into it and take a look at one of the more interesting rings first. Now, I do want to mention as well that two different rings can currently be worn together at the same time, as they are only unique to wearing two of the same one. I'm not sure if this is intended or it will last, but keep this in mind as we move through the different ring effects. A 4% damage bonus is pretty big, but twice the amount of curse effects can also be pretty hindering depending on the scenario. The first corrupted ring is called Face the Truth, and it will periodically spawn an eldritch scroll near you that both you and others with the same ring can see. For each second that you don't face the scroll, it seems that it will deal damage to you at some point and fear you after 6 seconds. Now, it does say that both you and other players wearing the same ring can see the scroll, but I'm not sure if that implies that they have to actually face the scroll just as you do. If that does end up being the case and multiple people are wearing the same ring for whatever reason, this could become pretty frustrating to manage with multiple scrolls spawning. The spawn location does seem random, as I had a few spawn behind me, some at my side, and one actually directly in front of me. If you are not standing at max range from your target, you can simply back up a bit if the scroll spawns in front of you to easily negate the curse effect of the ring. Overall, this ring does not seem too hard to manage, barring fights with a lot of specific frequent movement, and the 2% bonus damage effect is very strong. Corrupted Ring Spontaneous Fury will periodically mark a random enemy with a Fury debuff, which makes them the target of your Fury. Attacks against other targets will deal 10% less damage for the duration of this effect. Now, the Fury debuff actually places a small red Hunter's-like mark arrow over the mob, and it lasts for roughly 8 seconds. The interesting part about this ring is that it pretty much seems like a flat 2% increase on pure single-target patchwork fights like Abyssal Commander Savara and others. This effect seems exceptionally powerful if there ends up being a single-target fight in 8.3 that brings with it a tight DPS check or enrage timer. Now, I did test with the ring a few times, and it feels like there is some kind of internal cooldown on the actual proc as well, as I never had it proc back-to-back once. Corrupted Ring Mesmerizing is a pretty interesting curse effect for us dot-based classes, and I suppose classes that hit frequently in general. The curse effect reduces your movement speed by 5% for 6 seconds and stacks up to 10 times based off your attacks against a repeated target. The unfortunate part for us dot-based classes is that each and every dot tick actually applies a stack of the debuff. Thankfully, the debuff does indeed reach 10 stacks, tick for its full duration, and fall. However, it does stack back up pretty quickly for dot-based classes once again, so if you're wearing this ring for whatever reason, get used to moving at half speed. Unfortunately, a 50% movement reduction is pretty big, and even with speed increasing effects like Burning Rush or Sprint, it's still pretty noticeable. It greatly hinders your ability to dodge or deal with mechanics both in Mythic Plus and raiding. Now, Corrupted Ring Thing from Beyond is where it really starts to get interesting. The curse effect will periodically summon a Thing from Beyond, which will chase and attack the player if it reaches them. Its movement speed is apparently increased by corruption, but I did not see a way to track that on the mob, and it did not seem to move any faster when kited over the course of its lifespan. One of the most interesting things about this ring, however, is that Thing from Beyond actually spawns outside of combat, so you can't really AFK with this ring on. Most of them seem to have spawned at either my side or behind me, which does make reacting to them a bit easier, and they do move at a pretty slow pace. They do not have a tremendous amount of health and only seem to pursue you for about 12 seconds as well. If they do reach you, they cast a strike ability that hit me for about 85,000 damage and then despawn after one attack. Now, the interesting part about this effect is that you are indeed able to attack and build resources off of them. They do indeed grant extra inevitable demise stacks as well as count towards procs and other resource-based interactions. While they are not active for an extended period of time, Affliction locks, Destro locks at times, and other classes should be able to leverage a bit of extra resources from each spawn. I did want to see if they are set on a certain timer, and it does indeed seem that an ad will spawn roughly every minute and a half after the previous ad has died. Now, I did test this a few times, and it seems to be pretty consistent. I never had two ads spawn back to back or really break the minute and a half cycle in general. If it is indeed true when they spawn every 1.5 minutes, then it makes tracking them for resource generation and cleave much easier, which can certainly be used to your advantage for certain specs. As a Warlock, this ring to me has the most potential raw value that we've talked about so far, and I'm interested to see if it changes over the remaining course of PTR. Corrupted Ring Last Grasp is an effect that can be used to generate resources, similar to how Thing from Beyond functions. Whenever you kill an enemy, you spawn a hostile tentacle that will attempt to void grip you to it. Now this effect does seem a bit buggy currently on PTR, as I did have some grip me while standing relatively close to them, and some would just finish their actual grip cast and despawn without any negative effect. I did test both melee range and standing a good bit away from the tentacle, but it did not seem to have much effect as I was pulled to it from both locations when it actually was functioning. As mentioned, these were also attackable, thus generating resources, but they were also interruptible. It seems that once you interrupt their initial cast, they simply despawn after a few seconds as well, pretty much negating the curse-based effect. One thing that I'm not clear on currently is how the effect functions on large AoE-based pulls. It is not clear if you have to be the one landing the killing blow to proc the effect, even though it's worded like that, or if it procs off mobs that you have hit or dealt damage to upon death in general. I would imagine that it functions like Doom, where you have to be the actual one to kill said mob, but I have not been able to confirm this as of yet. Corrupted Ring Masochistic has a very interesting curse-based effect that taunts on nearby enemies whenever you fall below 25% health. From testing, it does seem to have roughly a 10 yard or so range on the actual AoE-based taunt ability. There also seemed to be a second or so delay between the actual taunt animation and the mobs being taunted. Now, I'm not sure if the 10 or so yard range is actually intended or a bug, but it does seem to favor range-based DPS and healing classes more than melee by default. If it is indeed intended, then this effect seems like a free 2% damage increase for players who can stand at range from the boss or mobs most of the time. I think that the most interesting application for this ring, however, is PvP. It also mostly seems like a flat 2% DPS or healing increase here, and I'm curious if Blizzard will change the curse half of this ring to bring it some kind of PvP based drawback or not. They could also disable these ring effects in PvP as a whole, but I would imagine that they would like to avoid negating new content if possible. Corrupted Ring Revel in Violence brings with it another curse-based effect that really has no implications for single-target PvE-based fights. It states that your killing blows cause you to revel in violence, rooting you for 6 seconds. Similar to other root-based effects, you're still able to attack during said root and escape it using racials or other means. On single-target fights, or fights where you will only kill 1 to 2 mobs and a boss, this ring seems very powerful, just like Spontaneous Fury. Even if the secondary stats are not something you're interested in, a flat 2% DPS increase and healing increase is very powerful, and personally, the drawback does not seem like enough of a curse in certain scenarios. I would not be surprised if this effect is changed as well to become a bit more universally dampening, in a sense. The final ring is called Corrupted Ring Overconfident, which applies an absorb equal to 25% of your total health for the next 10 seconds when overhealed. Now, while I don't really heal very often, this effect seems pretty punishing as a whole, especially on certain fights and progression in general. With the options that we have from other rings, and some of them being almost irrelevant on certain fights, at least the curse part of it, I feel like this is not going to be many players' first choice if possible. It is a bit more manageable for specs like Aflock or others that can bring with them self-healing, but I feel other rings will most likely end up being a better choice in most scenarios. Now, as I mentioned, while all these rings are unique, you can indeed wear 2 different rings for a massive 4% increase to both damage and or healing. The thing that worries me the most is that some effects mostly can be ignored or are just straight up irrelevant on single target fights like Revel in Pain and Spontaneous Fury. Now, I will say this is the first iteration of 8.3 PTR, however, so I would imagine that a handful of effects will be changing, as well as potentially some secondary stat combinations on certain rings. Things get even more interesting, however, when you start talking sockets and taking them into consideration as well. A 2% increase on a non-socketed ring with a negligible effect is big, but what if you get, say, an overhealing ring with a socket to drop, or even a slow ring with a socket? Either way, I do really like the fact that Blizzard is finally experimenting with these Kiss curse effects we've been hearing about for a while, and for a first trial, they all look pretty exciting to play with. I do hope that some of the effects are brought more in line with others for certain scenarios, however, and we don't end up just wearing the irrelevant effects for certain fights. I personally hope that we see more of these effects in the future, as I feel they do add another layer of gameplay and potential optimization to multiple scenarios. Let me know what you think of the new rings and the Kiss curse system in the comment section below, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them there and I'll be sure to get back to you. If you're interested in any week auras or add-ons you see here, there's a link to both my Twitch, where I stream 5 or 6 days a week, as well as Discord in the description, where you can find them all. If you want to see more WoW content and help support the channel, smash those like, share, and subscribe buttons, as your support really helps. Thanks guys, and I'll see y'all again soon. Peace.